Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots. I'm James Hill and I'm joined today by Michael Simmons and Katie Balls. Now, Michael, it's always a delight to see you, but today you're saying it's Terrible Tuesday. Tell us why.
Yeah, well, it's not a great start to April if you're literally anyone. And that's because overnight, the cost of living has jumped again. We've got energy bills going up, water bills going up, broadband going up, transport fees going up, TV licenses going up, as well as a host of taxes. So there's some big council tax rises, capital gains taxes going up, vehicle taxes going up. And if that's not enough, we'll start to feel some of the effects of fiscal drag, and the stamp duty deadline has been impassed as well. So there's changes to stamp duty making it harder and more expensive to buy and sell homes. So basically, if you're anyone who spends any money or has to pay any bills, living your life just got a lot more expensive.
So there is one exception.
Yes, the one exception is if you are a pensioner. Obviously, you still pay these bills, but you're also going to see your state pension go up today. There's also, it's worth mentioning, minimum wage is increasing today too. That's got benefits for younger people because the changes are more focused at the people in the younger age. However, that's not necessarily a good thing in itself, because when you factor in the £25 billion raid on national insurance, most sort of economists believe that these changes are actually going to make it less likely that young people end up employed. And indeed, some of the people on lower incomes may even lose their jobs as a result.
I mean, Katie, some of these bill rises are to do with choices made since the election, such as on national insurance, but also some of them are just longer term factors, such as on energy costs.
I think it's just adding to the strain effectively, and to Michael's point, is there much good news right now? Now, we know that we have the business taxes coming in also in a few days' time, and that is the one which could potentially lead to more job shortages and so forth. And then you also add, well, tariff day is obviously coming up the tracks, and the pessimism in government about the idea of a carve-out. There's talk that it could mean that you see the markets flooded with cheaper goods, which might mean a temporary reprieve for some people struggling with cost of living. And then, of course, does that eventually lead to a situation whereby UK producers and UK companies are pushed out of the market? You're then further at the will, which the UK is already, on on international companies who then can obviously move up prices as suits them. So I think in the mix, it's just more problems for the government because it's more problems for voters, particularly when this government has obviously made economic growth its big thing, but also switched to talking about living standards. Now, they look at the OBR assessments in the spring statement. They had some things to point to on living standards, but I think certainly right now no one is feeling that or particularly hopeful. And it's that boost in living standards, which I think most Labour MPs is key to the entire project.
Yeah, I mean, Plan for Change, number one priority was a rise in living standards over the next course of the few years in this Parliament. I mean, Michael, all of these bill rises happening at the beginning of April come at the same time as a worsening macroeconomic picture for the UK, and we've actually seen, obviously, just last week, the spring statement, the revising downward of expectations of growth over the course of this Parliament. This fits with the general trend, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, the government can't affect a lot of these changes because the utility bills, they're just linked to inflation. So as inflation is up, so too the bills go up. But that will kind of feed into a circular effect, which in itself will push inflation up. There's a report out this morning that expect that it's going to be well into next year, possibly even 2027, before inflation gets back down to that target. The other thing that the government is going to be worried about, as Katie mentions, tomorrow is Tariff Day, or as Donald Trump is calling it, Liberation Day. And one of the things that the OBR mentioned in their report last week is that if the worst effects of the tariffs on GDP are felt, then that's going to wipe out Rachel Reeves' headroom again to zero, and very quickly we'll be back to the problem we were in before the spring statement last week.
I mean, ministers, Katie, have been very keen to sort of stress that they're going to be sticking to their plan in terms of Rachel Reeves' commitment to that fiscal headroom and the constraints put down by the OBR. But is your sense perhaps that morale within Parliament among Labour MPs is perhaps potentially fraying somewhat?
I think there's definitely a lot less goodwill, as we spoke about previously, in the Labour Parliamentary Party at the moment. But then also, I think given the difficult decisions they've been asked to swallow recently, there are some, such as John McTernan on this podcast last week, but also some MPs asking, where is the fight? And it might be because they feel they're in a fiscal straitjacket.
Yeah.
So there's not many alternatives. But that certainly isn't the view of all Labour MPs. They think that you can change the fiscal rules. Rachel Reeves is just not the Chancellor who's going to do it. And I think on the welfare rebellion, that is just going to rumble on. No one really thinks. I think when the whips throw out a figure such as 50 MPs could rebel, that tends to mean they think it's going to be less than that. So they can say, thanks to our amazing whipping skills, we have managed to reduce this. And who did these rebels even think they were? But you have seen Number 10 having to do a lot more outreach. There's been some grumbles about the operation in terms of management. And I think just also having such a large party, it obviously creates some pluses in the sense that you have a very big majority, but it's also really hard to keep track of everyone. And every Labour MP wants someone they can go and nurse their grievance to and be heard. So I don't think it feels very positive. I think you are still in the early years, though, and as things go, this does not feel particularly dangerous for Keir Starmer. It's just that the whole project starts to fail if the economy doesn't improve. And I was speaking to a former cabinet minister for Labour, and they were talking about how they think Labour governments particularly struggle when you're in a low growth, no growth period, because they find it harder to enforce these decisions, and also to have the sweeping vision that comes along with it, such as Rachel Reeves talking about how moral mission for welfare. That's also what Keir Starmer's talking about. But then last minute tinkering to create headroom exactly the same size as the headroom before for your welfare cuts, which again doesn't quite feel as though it's the project they were all thinking about in opposition. And as soon as they came in, they brought in that reform, which I think if you look at some of the projects under the Tories, and of course you can criticise, and I am going to mention the current editor, but you do look at the Michael Gove education reforms, so much was done outside that it was ready to go. I think with lots of the changes Labour are doing, it feels it's more just responding to events. So, we need more defence spending, we'll cut international aid. We are going to have to change welfare because we need money, but we're going to say it's the moral mission. And obviously two things can be true at once. But I think one of the things that is just causing a little bit of anxiety is perhaps the wrong word, but unhappiness amongst Labour MPs is not much of this feels as though it is connected to a wider project. And instead, and you saw this in the Labour list league table recently, of course, which had Rachel Reeves at the bottom. Then you had, Wes Streeting wasn't doing particularly well, but you had Bridget Phillipson, I think was number 7. Now, I think that's interesting because if you have a league table of 27 ministers, and you think about all the negative press that Bridget Phillipson gets, and some negative press she has received on this podcast when it comes to the schools bill. Well, speak to Labour MPs, and they broadly see that schools bill as a good thing. Now, obviously, it's stocking it to private schools to a degree, but also some of the things on lost children and COVID and homeschooling. And therefore, I think it's also a view that this is something which is more coherent to some of the things that were being said before the election too, which you don't get with some of the other departments because they're having to respond to really tricky events, but they are responding to events.
Yeah, it's the question about how much you're master of your own destiny. And listening to Rachel Wolf at a conference 2 weeks ago, and she was making the point on the education bill, the great success of the last government, that was all done before they got into government. So they knew what they were going to do in that respect rather than sort of reacting to events. I mean, Michael, this morning, the unlucky minister who had the chance to respond to all these bills coming through today was Jonathan Reynolds. We can listen to a clip here.
Have you done your sums, Secretary of State? Do you know how much your bills are going up?
This time of year, when bills rise, is of course a difficult time. But the things
How
that
much
the
are your
government
bills going up?
I haven't done that calculation myself personally.
Well, very helpfully, we've done it for you. So we can tell you, Secretary of State John Reynolds, we can tell you that your council tax is going up £115. If you pay the average, and you probably don't pay exactly the average, but if you did, on gas and electricity, you'll be paying another £111, and your water bill is going to be going up £155. So John Reynolds' bills, before all the other things that are going up, £381 extra. How does that make you feel?
So tell us, Michael, in terms of the positive case for the government, I mean, what are the kind of things that they're looking for in terms of giving some positivity over the next coming months or so in terms of economic forecasts?
Well, look, it's going to be very tricky for them. And actually, on the Jonathan Reynolds point, we should just plug that if you don't want to get caught out like the minister did there, we've got a tool on the website, and you can have a look at how much your council tax, for instance, is going to go up. I was having a look at it this morning. It's staggering. In Falkirk, it's going up by nearly 16%, which will make a huge dent on households. And when you've got price rises like that, look, it's very difficult for the government, I think, to keep plugging this £500 better off line, which is some number that comes into play hypothetically in 2029, when people from this month are actually going to, feel pain in their pockets. But having said that, let's not pretend, the picture isn't bleak, because it is. We've got the price rises, the tariff effects, if they do come into play, as they almost certainly will from tomorrow. That's going to obviously be a big negative. But it does also present opportunities, I think, for Britain to say that the economic picture is rosier than we think. So, Katie mentioned that there might be some short-term price drops as cheaper goods come into the country. The other thing that people in the city have been telling me is that they think that the FTSE 100, that's famously underperformed really for the last 2 decades compared to America, they think there might be this effect of funds pulling out of the American stock market, so the S&P, the Nasdaq, and moving into the FTSE, which could boost growth. It will obviously boost investments in the UK, and crucially for the government, it would boost tax receipts. So I think if you're looking for potential positives, there's maybe something there, but you're getting close to clutching at straws territory.
And finally, Katie, today we're expecting a press conference by Kevin Badenoch talking about Labour's so-called jobs tax. This comes just the morning after we got the Sentencing Council U-turn, which was something Robert Jenrick very much led on in terms of those new guidelines that are set to be introduced. I mean, how are the Tories trying to exploit the current Labour woes over the economy?
Well, I think it's one of the areas where, despite Labour's tendency to talk about Liz Truss and the mini budget, they think they have probably the most cut through, because on immigration, there are some in the party who do think Kemi Badenoch should talk about it more. But the comeback is, well, voters listening because of the recent record. It's very easy to do a plague on all your houses. Let's talk about reform and Nigel Farage as an alternative. So when you look at voter issues where the parties are leading on, reform very much have a strong lead on immigration. But on the economy, that is where the Tories, I think, have the potential. They have a lead according to some polls, but also you see how Rachel Reeves' management on the economy is not polling well with the public, pointing to some of the issues we spoke about earlier on this podcast. And therefore, I think speak to various Tory strategists of old and new, and they think this is the area they should just keep going on. So bringing in a press conference about this jobs tax, as they're calling it, before it comes in, is of course the Tories trying to own the space. And it probably makes, I think, logical sense, just in the way that some of these areas where there are some areas where the recent Tory record is just harder. Now, of course, Labour will talk about the mini budget, but generally speaking, I don't think Reform have yet carved out a space of where they are in the economy in a clear way. They might have some policies that are individually popular, nationalisation and so forth, but there's not a coherent vision. I don't think most people think about economic management when they think about what Nigel Farage and Number 10 might do, for good or bad. So this is a place where I think, if you think about traditionally where the Tories have been compared to Labour, there is ground that can be made up.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for listening to Coffee House Shots.